Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be building Maverick's F-18, and this is from the Top Gun movie. It's a 1/48 scale model by Revell. And we'll start off with the cockpit. Here I'm using the side nippers to be able to remove the piece from the sprue and then sanding off those edges with the nail file. Here are the parts for the ejection seat and then also the instrument panel. So once I've got all those parts off, I start to build the ejection seat. These parts did not fit together very well. I used the Tamiya extra thin cement to try and get it to stick together, but it did not hold very well, and it would keep falling apart. So instead what I did was I just glued them in one at a time. Here you can see I'm just doing one side with the extra thin cement and then the other side. The extra thin cement works very well because it disappears into that crack and doesn't leave behind a lot of residue. Now once that's been put on, I'll then use the glue again to put on the ejection seat handle and then added some glue to the back. I did also glue in the control stick or control column into the base or floor of the cockpit. Here I'm filling some gaps on the ejection seat. This is with Vallejo plastic putty because otherwise it has these huge holes. It wasn't a very well made ejection seat. Now I'm spraying primer on these parts, and I like the airbrush because it gets into all the little areas that are difficult to get to with the brush. And once that's done, now I'm going to paint by hand the inside of the cockpit. This is with a gray color, and also the top of the instrument panel. Now while that's drying, I paint the control stick. That's with the black. This is Vallejo black. It's a primer because it sticks to pretty much everything. And this is the same thing here for the switch panels on the side of the cockpit. And I just use a hand brush for this, and it goes on pretty good. Now while this section is drying, I'm going to work on the ejection seat using the same black primer for the top and sides of the ejection seat. This ejection seat does have a good amount of detail, even though it doesn't fit together very well. But there is a lot of side detail and surface detail on it. I did want to make an extra little handle that's supposed to be on the seat. I did this out of a little lead solder and glued this on with super glue, and here you can see that sitting on the side. I also wanted to make a throttle because it was not visible on the left hand side of the cockpit here, and that's with a piece of plastic sprue and then a much larger piece as well. Once that was dry, I then painted it black and left that to dry. Now I'm working on the details here for the instrument panel. I'm painting these screens black, and some of the surface detail as well as the switch panels. So the seat is supposed to be olive drab, and so I painted that, and there are some molded in seat belts. They aren't very pronounced, but they're definitely there, and you can paint them, which I did with this green. You can see I also painted that little side handle. So here I'm painting the seat belts with the green. There are multiple seat belts to this. If you want, you can buy some aftermarket photo etched parts. Now the screens for the instrument panel, I put these on using micro set and micro sole. Really helps to soften it so that it sticks very well, and then same for the lower instrument panels as well. You really want to make sure you let this dry very well before you clear coat them or do anything else. Sometimes it requires multiple brush coatings with the micro set and micro sole. Here are the side panels. Not a whole lot of detail. I don't think that these were very clear, these switch panels, but it's probably a little bit easier than having to paint all of them. I roll out the extra fluid and absorb it with the little Q-tip or earbud. Same thing for the top part and lower edges here of the instrument panel. So once these are starting to set very nicely and very well, I'm painting just little lines here on the ejection seat handle. That's it was baseline black and then painted some yellow. Some silver is being used here for the buckles for the ejection seat, And then once that's all done, I'm going to use that to paint some of the extra little details here on the sides of the ejection seat, especially some of the cables, lines, and attachments. A lot of the extra little details I prefer to do by hand, and I use just a regular little brush. Here's an example here, painting the side handle, the yellow and black, and then some additional details inside the cockpit with red. Now it's time to put the ejection seat inside. I do that with just a regular medium thickness glue. And once it's all done and dry, I then sprayed it with some clear coat, just a matte coat, and then applied some Tamiya panel line accent. Just gives it some depth to it, and then put in the instrument panel. So that is the finished part. Now I'm going to put some, this is just some silver dust on there, and it's time to move on. Now we're working on the fuselage and wings. So cutting off some extra pieces here. You can see I use a variety of tools, both the side nippers as well as the scalpel or blade, and then also nail file to sand things down. So this part, I guess, is because you may be able to get this kit with a twin-seater. This is obviously the single-seater, and so I am gluing that part in. As you can see, it didn't fit very well, so you'll see later on I'll fill that. They did unfortunately have the Revell stamp on the outside on this flap, and so I removed that with the nail file and then sanded it smooth. Now the insides here of the air take, I glued. This is the Revell Contactor Professional glue that I'm using. It's medium thickness, and I like the metal tip. It deposits small amounts of glue, but even then sometimes it's too much, and so I use the small extra thin cement. There are some gaps on this kit. It's not a great kit, and I'm using just the Tamiya filling putty, and once that's dry I'm sanding it off. This is just a regular nail file, and then 300 grit sandpaper. I think it's 320 actually. And it's time to prime these areas here on the inside. That includes the wheel well section there as well. So I did 2 coats because it was a little thin. I think I over thinned it. Same thing here with the insides of the wheel well. I initially did white primer, but it wasn't thick enough, and so I used the white. Same thing also with the inside of our air intakes. So it's a lot easier to paint these while they're out of the plane, and once that was dry I then masked it off so that I could paint the inside here with white, which is what it was supposed to be. And the airbrush is a good way to get that in there, and you can see when I peel that off it required just a little bit of additional paint. Now we're doing the priming of the inside of the cockpit because we have to mount the cockpit before we put the fuselage together. Now I'm filling the edges. You can see where there were gaps. It did not fit together very well at all, and so I'm sanding it off once that extra filler is dried. But as you can see, it did obviously sand off some of the recessed rivet lines, and so I used the rivet maker there to get me some lines, and then this little dental pick to get the recessed panel lines again, and this will help when I do the panel line accent. So here's some little pieces here for the back. This is the back of the canopy area, the cockpit, and now it's time to spray all of that black that's going to be inside. The wheel wells I sprayed white. That's with white primer rather than gray, because I'm going to use gloss white over that. Now in the center portion here is a fuel tank, and so I glued that on, and time to spray the gloss white over the wheel well details here. So I probably should have masked that off because I had to wipe it off. Now we do have some parts here for the inside of the exhaust and engine. So it's primed and then sprayed with aluminum. And then I use some panel line accent to give it some dimension and detail there, wiping off the excess with a Q-tip. Same thing for the rear part of the engines. Now it's time to glue on these pieces that actually fit very well, and you can see the inside there. So the inside part now, it's time to glue to the external wall of the air intake. It does not fit together very well, so you have to be very careful when you put it together. Now it's time to mount the cockpit on top of the nose wheel well, and did that with just regular glue. And the same thing with the sides here. I put a lot of glue on here. This is for the air intake and side wall. Just a little difficult to get the air intakes in because of the ducts, but once it's in, there's no way for it to really stick properly, so I did have to hold it in place with tape and also with clothespins. So same thing with the other side, lots of glue. I really want to make sure this holds together very well, and then slide it back there. So same thing with the side here, clothespins to hold it together, and even then it did not fit together very well, so use some tape to hold it in place, but there's still some gaps even with the extra pressure. So extra thin cement helps to glue the edges here and fill in some of the gaps. This is the axle for the elevator that needs to be glued together and put in before you put the fuselage together. Now we're working on the nose, and so the front part of the fuselage here comes separately and has fair amount of openings that need to be covered up here. And once that is dried together, you can fill the gaps because it did not fit perfectly, to be honest. So here you can see I'm using some extra thin cement and tape to help hold it together, and then the same thing for the underside, and I guess that enables them to print some extra detail on the underside. So here I am using the Tamiya putty, and this is to help to fill those gaps because they were quite significant, as well as some of the edges. The problem is that also that it's right next to some of the surface detail, which will need to be rescribed. Once that's dry, I then sand most of it off, and you can see what remains behind there. Moving on to the smoother sandpaper there. Now I'm using this little blade to be able to help to rescribe those panel lines as well as the dental pick, so that it will show up when it is time to put in the panel line accent. So this dental pick actually works very well. It's very sharp, and you will just add pressure as you go. Same thing with the rivet maker. So once that's all dry, it is time to prime. I'm using the Vallejo gray primer here, and ended up doing 2 coats and then slide it on. Now it's time to put the fuselage together, and it didn't fit together very well, so I ended up having to sand off some of those parts to be able to get it to fit in smoothly. And now I'm gluing on the actuators here for the control surfaces. These are the flaps, and I did that with the medium thickness glue and then reinforced it with a bit of the extra thin cement. So same thing with the control surfaces for the ailerons. So it's time to put the nose on, and it has to fit underneath that flap. So make sure that that is at the same level, otherwise you're going to get a huge gap. And I then glued that in place. And as you can see, the inside of the wheel wells here, there was a huge gap on the side, and then I filled with the Vallejo plastic putty. Thankfully that was white, otherwise I'd have to paint it again. Same thing with the edges of the fuselage here. There was quite a large gap. I then used my finger just to smooth out the rest of it. Now it's time to finally put the fuselage together. You can see that that is not glued in at the back, and at the front here was having some trouble putting the top on, even though I moved the instrument panel out of the way, and I found that there was some pieces of plastic on these hidden pieces that prevented from getting down to the correct height. So here I am putting it down again. This is all dry fitting before I put any glue on. If you put glue on, you've got to take it off, put it back on, you're going to end up ruining it. So lots of glue to put these 2 pieces together, and using the medium thickness glue, this stuff holds very well, and you can put large amounts down. So once that is on and glued, I then use these clothespins to be able to hold these pieces together. And now it's time to paint the inside of the wheel wells. There's lots of detail which I like on the inside of the wheel well. I like having the extra detail, but you have to paint the stuff. So it's the nose wheel well, painting it with black, some of the hoses, lines and tubes and so on, or with the matte black. This is the primer, it just sticks to everything. So there's lots and lots of detail here to paint. You can add whatever detail you want. I kind of added mostly just black and yellow. Now we have some pylons that we have to put together, and once they're glued, I put the clothespins on as well and let those dry, and that's for both sides, and then mounted them to the wings. I chose just to have the one set of pylons. Now when I'm doing the other side here, same story. The holes do have to be a little bigger, so I did drill those out with the hand drill. Now we're putting our rudder or vertical stabilizer on, and I did this with the medium thickness glue, and then added some extra thin cement to help seal the edges. And when you're putting these things on, if you're not going to look from the front, then you're obviously going to end up with something that looks incorrect. So here you can see I'm showing you, I wanted to make sure that I had the correct angle, so I did bend the one back to match it so that it's symmetrical. Now the edges of the wingtips here have these weapons rails or mounts, and these have to be glued into position as well. So once the wingtips are done, I'm going to put these wings on. I guess you could make them fold up, though there's no actual detail here for it. You would need to custom fabricate all of that. But that's the right wingtip going on. So my initial plan was to do this water-based acrylic type weathering, but as you can see, it didn't really do a whole lot. Now the rest of the joins are dry, but there's still a gap, and so I use the Tamiya putty to really fill this area out, and I scrape most of it off using this toothpick. But you don't have a lot of time to work. Fortunately, the stuff does dry very quickly, and so you can sand it quickly, but it means that you don't have a lot of time to work. So you got to be pretty quick. You work at one section and then move to another section. So you can see I really fill that gap and then scrape it off. Some of the smaller areas are difficult to get to, so I use the Vallejo plastic putty. Obviously, don't do this for the rudder. You want to show that the rudder does move, and then I use my finger just to get the rest of it off there. Same thing with the wing edges here, and filling that with the Vallejo putty, and then using my finger to get the rest of it off. I really do like this Vallejo putty for some of the recessed areas, and then the Tamiya putty for the more open areas. Here's our tail hook that's being glued on, and there's also this little winglet that helps to guide it, stabilize it while you're flying. Here are the weapons mounts, and they were a bit of a pain to get to stay on, but finally got them on there. And then on the opposite side, I chose to have this pod mount here, so that was glued on as well. Extra thin cement helps to secure that, and then we're back to sanding now that the rest of the putty is dry. So start with something like a 220. Here's a file, because I found that my sandpaper was getting clogged, and the file was easier to work. Once that's done, I use my rivet maker and just roll it along to add the rivets back. They do have different frequencies of rivets or distances, and it required quite a few, as I'd done quite a lot of sanding. Now, I don't want to obviously spray paint the inside of the wheel well, and so I use some putty to be able to fill that and cover it up. And then I'm using some alcohol to get rid of any fingerprints and oils, as well as some of the paint. So I just give it a good wiping, and then I'm filling the inside of the air intake with the tape. I use a very sharp blade and cut it off, and it's exactly the shape that you want. Now we do also have some of these little pitot tubes, which are stuck down using the extra thin cement. That way it doesn't leave a good fat glob of glue on there. And there's also that central vein. Now there's also a little flap that will cover the ladder and the central vein on top. So now it's time to prime the model. I gave the model a good coat of Vallejo Grey, and it was a little too thin, so I did have to wait for it to dry and do a second coat. I really enjoy this stage of the model because I feel like I'm making some good progress and covering up all the little patches and so on that I've had to do. So here you can see I'm holding the model by the front, and really I did most of it underneath so that it would dry by the time I need to put it down. And now that it's on the stand, I can then do the top section and really get a good gray color so that everything is uniform underneath, which is what I want. So the nose is now being painted because I don't have to hold it anymore, and both sides are now done. Here's the second coat going on, just to make sure that I really had a good coating. Now I really like to do the pre-shading. I do this with the Vallejo black primer. I'm not very careful about this. I really want it to look a little messy so that it gives some non-uniformity to it underneath. Some areas I'll do really big, some areas I'll do very small. And so if you want to get a really large area, you obviously do it further away and spray more paint. If you want it to be more detailed, you're going to get closer and spray less paint. But all the major panel lines I do, as well as gaps or areas where the surface changes a lot, like into the corners and so on. And then also with this top of the fuselage, it is supposed to be black, as well as the rudders and vertical stabilizers. So I painted all of those black while they had the black out. And here you can see I'm giving it a really good thick coat on the top of the aircraft here. Now once that was dry, I really let it dry for a long time because I didn't want it to come off when I pulled it off. I then masked off the top, which is supposed to be black, and now I'm doing my ghost gray here. This is the dark version, and as you can see I'm painting over it, but not enough that it's completely gray, because I want some of that shading to show up underneath and give it that darker look. So here you can see I'm painting the back of it and getting really all different sides that I can. Here's the right side of the fuselage and wing, and once you can see that area is just too light, so I go back and add some more because I want to be able to have just some of it showing through but not all of it. Now the darker gray was a little too dark for me, and so I went back and added a second layer of a lighter gray, but added it a bit more irregular fashion and left some of this to be able to show some of the panel line accent, as you can see here, painting the insides of the panels and leaving the lines to be more darker. So here's the underside of the aircraft. I already did the pre-shading here with the black, and now I'm adding a very light gray here. This is to match the clouds, I would imagine, when you're flying above someone. And so as you can see, it does leave some of the pre-shading visible, but if I'm not happy, if it's still too light, I'll go back and add some more. The area behind that pylon requires me to paint from the other side, and so here you can see I'm getting it from the other side. Now I did hand paint some extra details here. These are the wing tips with the weapon rail. I painted with that light gray as well. And now it's time to peel back the masking tape, and that masking tape did a beautiful job. Beautiful black line there. Same thing with the tail or the rudder, and also time to take out the inside of the air intake. So once I'm done with that, the nose tip needs to be painted. It was a slightly different color, so I gave this a cream color and painted it all the way around up until that little line there. Also added some silver here to the front of the nose where those air intakes were, and did all of that by hand. Added some silver also to the back of the tail. Now once that's dry, it's time to seal the model, which I did with a clear coat. This is a satin coat that will allow me to put the decals on and have them sit very nicely. It's not the final coat. Usually that'll be a more matte coat. I don't do too thick of a coat for this because I don't want to fill up the recessed panel lines and the rivet lines. So it's really just going to be a light coat that gives a good covering, but still allows the recessed panel and rivet lines to be filled. So now it's time to move on to the exhausts, and these come as one piece that are molded together. Now I'm priming the area, priming both of them with the Vallejo Gray primer. I wanted to have a red hue to it, so I painted this dark brown underneath the silver, and it gave it a slightly red hue to it. Now I'm hand painting the inside, and that's with the Vallejo black paint. This is very easy to do with the paintbrush. Same thing with the rim around the outside. But I wasn't entirely happy with that, and it was a little annoying and difficult, so I ended up masking them off and spraying them with that black paint. I then added some silver powder to be able to have it not be so dark. Now we're removing off the masking tape and continuing on with some additional silver powder. Here I'm adding some Panaline accent to the inside of the exhausts, and I'm gluing these into the back of the exhausts with the regular medium thickness glue. Now they do have some decals for the inside. Thankfully these are not rings. That would make it almost impossible to put in. These are just straight lines that you'll put into each of the panels, and I used my tweezers here to position them to make sure that they're all at least even. So there's 4 of them in so far. Once they were all in, I then pressed out the extra fluid with the Q-tip. A couple times they had to be adjusted. Now it's time for these to be glued on with the medium thickness glue, and these went in very nicely into the back of the airplane, although there were some small gaps. Now moving on to the decals, there are some decals on this plane, and this tail section has a very interesting decal because there are openings at the back for those raised sections, and then they give you these 4 little patches to cover them. So it was a little challenging. You have to get them to line up, and so I ended up floating them up with a lot of extra water to be able to get it so it moves around. Now here you can see I've put all the extra little pieces on there. They aren't quite lined up, but finally got them to sit decently. Here's the front, and this line down the side of the plane comes in multiple pieces, which makes it a little easier to get things to line up. Even then it's still a little challenging, so remember to add lots of extra water so it'll float and won't stick where it's not supposed to. So here is the line continuing down. The line does taper a little bit, and there's some black edges on the side to allow it to merge with the back black part of the fuselage. So holding in place, I find it very helpful then to drag the piece off, and then it sits mostly where you want it to be. So once I'm finished putting that on, I then push it down and suck up the extra fluid with the Q-tip. This enables the decal to sit a little bit more flat. Some decals here for the sides of the aircraft as well as the wing tips. Again, pushing it down with the Q-tip, get the extra fluid out. Now here is the Pete Mitchell name as well as the number of aircraft that they've shot down, and then the zeros on the side. Here's the air intake decal. This comes in 2 pieces, thankfully, because of that little gap there, and so just make sure that you line that up well. There are lots of little do not step and do not paint decals that need to go on, and then these nice decals here for the front for you to stand on. Here are the USAF, the American insignia. For the underside, there's 1 for each, not both sides, and then 1 for each side of the aircraft on either side. There's also some of those zeros on the side of the flaps. Now I do recommend cutting this decal because there's a little bump in the middle of the tail hook, and so it's just a lot easier to not have that huge lump there. Then you can use a brush or 2 brushes to be able to swing it around. Now you can see here there's a gap at the back of this aircraft between the fuselage and the exhaust, so I filled it up with clear glue, and that'll dry clear. Painting some additional details here on the underside of the aircraft, silver for the pitot tubes and then white for that sensor. And now we're moving on to missiles. Drilling out the back of the missiles here with the hand drill initially, and then the slow electric drill. and it also gives me a place to then paint. Priming it with grey primer again, and then once that's dry, we then move on to a white paint, and here you can see there's not a lot of white paint needed for them. And now we're going to be using the olive drab to paint the tips of the missiles, not the fins. The fins are actually not olive drab. They're going to be silver color, but the rest of it, the front and underneath, are all olive drab. So I just do this all by hand. I also hand painted the stripes, which are red and yellow. I do this just by twisting it around. And here we go, painting the fins, the silver color, both front and back. So a lot of this stuff is just easiest to do by hand, and you can always just go back and touch up if you need to. Use super glue to put these in place. Obviously you want to dry fit them, make sure they fit well before you do that. But gluing them into the correct place with the little tabs there makes it easier. I was going to start now on the wheel wells. So this is the one wheel well cover from the nose gear, and I'm using liquid mask here because a part of it is supposed to be clear. That's why the whole part is clear, and I'm going to paint that off. This is my first time really trying liquid mask, and we'll see how that turns out. Now I'm removing the putty that I had used to cover the nose wheel well, and also the main gear wheel well, and as you can see, it does a pretty good job of covering that. Now I'm going to be painting these wheel well covers, the doors. This is going to be white on the inside, so it's initially a white primer and then gloss, and when that's dry I'm going to put the decals on, and these decals just help to add a little bit of realism. Now on the outside it's the grey primer, and the same thing for that nose wheel well, grey primer as well, and then we'll paint the same light grey color onto the outsides of the doors, and then it's time to sand off the edges because that's where the glue is going to go. Here I'm just using some super glue. That's the CA glue, and it holds it pretty nicely once you've got a good amount of glue in the right place. So same thing here with the insides of the doors. Now it's time to build the landing gear. So they're pretty significant, this landing gear, and they're pretty sturdy, but it looks like there's some parts that have to be sanded out as well as filled. There definitely are some holes here. As you can see, I'm using the putty, Tamiya putty, to fill those holes where the plastic kind of pulled away when it was cooling. So once that's all dry, then I'll sand it off. We'll use this file, as it doesn't have to be replaced very often like sandpaper, but I'll file that down and then I'll give it a light sanding afterwards. So here you can see the kind of gap that was there, and I use this extra thin cement just like that to help to soften some of the lines and then add some of these details here. There are extra parts, little rings and so on, and actuators and pistons and so on that are added to the landing gear, and I actually, here you can see I'm putting them inside the wheel well to make sure that they're all in the correct alignment while I glue them, and then I'll take them out and paint them afterwards. This is just so that I don't have to worry about figuring it out later that I glued them in the wrong place. So there's the actuators there to bring them up into the airplane, and those go into the corner there. So additional little rings going on there with some just regular glue. Now I did want to add some details here, so I've got some lead solder wires there, and this is to simulate brake lines going down there, so that's glued with CA glue, and there are a couple of extra little pieces here to simulate the different hydraulics going down. It doesn't take very long to do this, but it certainly adds a nice touch of realism, and the CA glue makes it stick really, really well. On this one there are two hydraulic lines going down, and these are a bit of a pain to put in. They kept moving around. Here's the other side, same thing going in the reverse, and this I just looked up online to kind of get an idea as to where they were. So I put the CA glue on, and then put the hydraulics on there as well. So once that's all dry, it's time to prime. This is with the white primer, because I'm going to do white gloss. The white doesn't cover very well, so it's just easier if you have everything white to begin with. So I've got all those parts there, and the part that I'm holding with the clothespin is the part that's going to be glued inside, so you don't need to worry. Here's the gloss white paint, and when that's all dry now, I'll start to do the extra little details by hand. As you can see there, I just ended up accidentally painting some black on the side, so I'll have to go back and touch that up later on with the white gloss, which was actually very easy to do. But all these little hoses and hydraulic lines, I'm painting them black like rubber. Silver here for the part that'll move up and down. There is a decal that's supposed to go on here. It is a little challenging to put on there because it has to recess inside something that's already curved, but finally got it to do with the decal softener, and then push it down with the Q-tip. They do have lots of nice little decals here for added realism, which is very nice. A lot of planes don't have this. They're the landing lights, and some more details here for the gear. Now, I did trim off a little piece here of that metal just so that it could sit better. Here's another decal going on, and just adjusting that position. Now, that initial metal area there was not showing up where I wanted it to be, so I painted it black, and now I'm painting the main gear. Previously that was the nose gear. And these metal soldering wires are very easy to paint because they are sticking out more than something would if it was just molded on. More little instruction plates that are decals to put on, and it gives you a very nice appearance at the end. Now it's time to seal them. This is with just a matte clear coat, and doing some additional painting. So originally I told you about how I put the silver on there and it didn't show up very well because the white was the base. So I repainted them with black and now silver, and so that shows up the silver much more nicely. Same thing with these bands that go around. So now it's time to do some weathering. This is just the Tamiya brown panel line accent. I use brown to simulate dirt and then black to simulate gaps and holes. So this is brown, and I'm putting it on most of the areas where there are joins. I really want to show some of the places where they are, there should be some visible gap, but everything's white. So this is just with the enamel thinners, taking off the bulk of it, and you can't rub too hard because you'll rub through the paint, but as you can see, it removes most of it and leaves somewhat of a dirty appearance like it's been used. And checking it again inside just to make sure that it goes in correctly. So here we are putting in the wheel well doors. That one was a little bit challenging to get in, but did manage to do it. The nose wheel well did not fit in properly, and I actually had to trim off a piece of it before I super glued it. So that's why you always dry fit something before you put the glue on, just to make sure. Here's the other door, and then this little piece in between, which I actually had to put super glue on and then use a pair of tweezers to put in there because I couldn't get it in with my hands. It's a very small little fine piece, and then afterwards I'll paint that. So here's just some more super glue going on. Now we're putting in the nose gear, and that's super glued in, gives you a nice strong bond, and then super gluing on the wheel well cover, and there are little tabs for where this is supposed to go. So once that's in the correct place, make sure it's solid. Okay, we're going to work on the wheels now. I do like the fact that there are bulges on the wheels, and it shows you that it's been sitting on the ground. These are glued together, and then once it's dry, I will sand them. This is with the rough side and then smooth side afterwards. It's time to prime them, and so this is with the gray primer, and then white for the inside of the hub. And once I've done that and it's dry, I'll put the putty there to try and cover up the inside, and then use, this is Tamiya black, the tire black, and now just adding some additional pieces there where it was covered by the putty. So it did require fair bit. I don't remember why exactly I had so much of it covered, but as you can see, it gives a very nice appearance. And now that that's done, it's time to do some weathering. This is with a Tamiya brown Panaline accent again, and then smearing it around with the enamel thinners. And then this is the other side, showing off some of that detail, which actually the detail on these wheels is actually quite nice, and really does a good job. This enamel thinners doesn't take long to dry, and so it's time to put them onto this is the nose gear, and do that with super glue. I give it a good twist so that it's going to stay, and have glue distributed on the inside. Same thing with the main gear here. I'm going to put the wheels on. Now the important part of these wheels is that there's a large bulge, so obviously this needs to be flat against the surface. So you can see here, I then turn it over, make sure I can look underneath and see to make sure that they are lined up and that they are both flat. Now these wheel well doors all have red edges on the inside, and so these need to be painted. It's kind of difficult to mask it off and spray it, so I did this all by hand. And this is with just a small brush and just regular Tamiya red color. Now the nose gear has this clear part, so I'd covered it up with the liquid mask, and here you can see I'm removing it, and it did a pretty good job actually. I was able to get mostly a smooth line. And the rest I just kind of scraped off with the pair of tweezers here. So it took a while to get all of it off because I guess I didn't put enough on that it would come off together. It was really just enough to cover it, but not actually come off together. So I'm just scraping off the edging there to make sure I get a nice straight line. I did have to go back and paint little joins in between. Same thing with this piece here. There's the red line that gets painted around on the inside, and that's done with just regular Tamiya red. Okay, so I'm going to finish up with this area. Just made sure I get a good dose of red. I found that these lines were a little easier to paint because they had a nice ridge that you could rest the paintbrush against. Much better than the front nose wheel wells or covers. So just painting up the rest of this all on the inside. Did both sides, and there are quite a few of them to paint on both sides. Now the wings, I decided not to use all the pylons. I didn't want to mount all the weapons. I wanted to make this look like the F-18 on their final mission where they just had the 2 bombs. And so I'm just putting some styrene plastic rods here, different sizes, to fill that up, look like pylons. We're going to work on the ladder here. This ladder was actually a little bit annoying. You can see you've got to put all those little pieces in there, and it was not molded together so that you could have some surface detail, but it was difficult to get it all lined up, and I had to try several different ways to get them to stick. And then when I did, then one of them was usually out, and I'd try and adjust that. So I probably should have just used thicker glue that would held it right from the get-go. But here you can see I'm using the tweezers to try and get them to stick. There's that one that is still out of place, and I'm using another pair of tweezers to try and line that one up so it would all lock in. And finally got it to the point where I was reasonably happy with it, but this was not easy, and it was quite frustrating. Now there is a side little actuator there, hydraulic actuator, that is glued on, and then the spring or lever that it's on also needs to be glued in. So when that's all done, it's time to prime it, and this is with the gray Vallejo primer, and paint over everything. I really like to airbrush these things because it gets the paint everywhere. They do have some decals for the ladder, but honestly you could have just painted them. Now the actuator and some of the hardware there is painted with white, where the rest of it on the outside is gray, the inside is all white. So this is the first layer. I did have to do 2 or 3 layers because the white is very thin. Here you can see I'm painting the back of those steps on the ladder black because they're supposed to be black. And now I'm going to mount it, but when I dry fitted, I found that it didn't actually fit in properly. The holes were a little too small, probably covered with a little bit of paint. And so here you can see, finally get it into there. It shows where that extra piece is supposed to go. And so I drilled a little hole with a blade like that, so there would be a place to glue in the ladder. So I'm using super glue here. This is the CA glue medium thickness, and it just tends to hold very well, especially painted parts. I get that part in first, and once that's in, then I will then get the extra little piece to go in, and then it'll act like a triangle and it'll hold it in the right place. The CA glue doesn't take long, and before you know it, you can move on. So now it's time to seal the decals and do some weathering. So I'm using, this is just a satin finish. You could do gloss as well, doesn't matter, as long as you're not doing matte. Gloss is honestly better because you seal, and the panel line accent can then make its way through capillary action down those little tracks. So I give it a reasonable amount of clear coat here, just to really seal it in, because I don't want to be rubbing off paint that I shouldn't be. So turn it around, and oh yes, there's one more thing here. This is the pod that needs to be glued together, and that'll be sitting underneath there. I use the clothespins to hold it in place, and then when that's dry, I'm going to prime it. Obviously I'm holding onto one section, so I have to then take it off and spray the other side. Once that's all sprayed with the correct color, I do use some weathering. This is the acrylic version of a brown. It did a reasonable job, and now it's ready to place on the model. I did this with CA glue as well, and then same thing here with the underside of the nose wheel. Well, I didn't do this initially because it has clear on it, and I didn't want to cover that clear. So I start off with the acrylic here, as you can see, trying to get it into the rivet lines and panel lines on the underside. This is that brown color. It wasn't a very strong color, and to be honest, it actually ended up setting pretty quickly before I got to do any streaking or removal of the excess, which was a little frustrating, but I managed to get through it. Here you can see the panel lines and rivet lines showing up with that brown color. With the enamel-based ones, you can certainly paint the whole model and let it dry. You're supposed to let it dry and then use the thinners, but with the acrylic one, probably should have done the streaking first. Here you can see I'm using a Q-tip or earbud to kind of absorb most of it, but also do the streaking, and looks like it's been blown against by the wind of the air as it passes underneath and over the wing. As you can see, this is already dried, so I had to get some water on there, and wasn't very happy with that. So I did certainly try and fix most of this with the acrylic, but I probably won't use the acrylic again. Here I'm using the Tamiya panel line accent. This is an enamel-based one, and it's so much easier to work with the Tamiya enamel thinners. You have to use that product with this one because that's what they're designed for. Other thinners I've seen have just eaten through all layers of paint. So I painted really the whole thing. This is with black now, and now I'm getting the thinners on. You can see it absorbs most of it onto the paper towel, and then I get some streaking to look like it has been blown past at high speed. Same thing with the rest of this underside of the wing. Get the thinners on there and then brush it off. And that does a very nice job of getting rid of the extra, the bulk, and leaving it behind in the panel lines, as well as the recessed rivet lines, but also gives a little bit of a dirty streaking appearance to look like it's been flown. This little area was a little difficult to get into just because it's very recessed, but the Q-tip does do a great job of that. Same thing with these little vents here at the back and with the exhaust tips. It really does give you a very nice effect with that panel line accent and then the thinner streaking it out afterwards. So here we're going to the top of the aircraft. Same thing with those vents there and the grill, and then removing the bulk of it. It doesn't take very long to do this, but it does give you a very nice effect. So I always recommend weathering your model. Don't forget you have to seal it with a clear coat first, that allows it to not stick to the underlying paint. And then there you go, spreading it out with that paper towel. So that's the top here. Here's the front of the aircraft, and same thing, just using that panel line accent. Don't forget to go in the direction of airflow, and it just such a nice effect. It really adds some detail to the model, especially like it's been flown. Here's the wing tips, and same thing on the underside. The missile also can use some of this, so whatever's left over, I certainly will rub it over the missile and just add some streaks. Now we're working on the elevator. So now we're working on the elevator. They come as one piece, and we're doing some gray Vallejo primer, giving it a good coat, and then using the black primer to do some pre-shading. Hopefully show some of the detail here. Those are some of the lines that are visible on the elevator. And once that's done, spraying the same grays that I had for the fuselage and wings. Top and bottom is a little too visible there, so I added some additional. Same thing on the other side. You can see it's needs some additional on that. Yep, there you go, on the front left, until you can just see it showing through. Now we're clear coating this. This is the same story again with clear coating, so that we can add the decals. So here's the decal going on, and clear coating again. You can see those two little decals, no step. Now I'm putting the, I tried the acrylic wash again, but it really just doesn't have a lot of power to it. So you can get it to streak across there. It'll add some substance, but it's not the same as having the Tamiya panel line accent, which just is a lot more pigmented. So here you can see I'm streaking it across the back of the fuselage here. I did add some Tamiya panel line accent, but I think that these little holes here weren't quite deep enough, and I probably filled them with a little bit too much paint and clear coat. But did manage to get them to streak off a little bit here with the thinners, and you can see it actually ate through the paint a little bit, so I had to go back and touch that up. So that won't happen if you use the regular Tamiya thinners. Now it's time to mount the elevators on the back of the plane. They're a little stiff to get in. You can see I'm struggling with that left-hand side. I just could not get it to go back in, and I really wanted to make sure that I wouldn't have to glue it onto the side of the fuselage. There is that little rotational axis or axle inside, and I wanted to make sure it could fit, so I tried scraping it. I tried sanding it, but I couldn't really get it to go in properly. So what I finally had to do, as you'll see here, is I had to sand off the extra paint. So once I sanded it off, it was then thin enough to be able to get in, and it went in very easily. And then it was still mobile, that the elevator would go up and down. Okay, so now we're working on the fuel tank. This fuel tank goes underneath. This is painted black. It's a very large fuel tank, and so this is glued together with the regular medium thickness glue. I then used tape to hold it together, and my regular clothespins didn't hold it. There was a bit of an edge there, so I did sand it initially with the rough and then the smooth, and then as you can see there were some gaps there, so I did fill them with the Tamiya putty, and once that was dry I then sanded it off, and that went very smoothly. Now it's time to prime it, which I did with black paint, and then sprayed on some gloss. This is a clear gloss here, as it was very shiny underneath the airplane. So once that's done, now I want to move on to making bombs. So I stole these from this other plane. This is an F5 by Revell, same dimensions, and I stole these bombs. There's like kit bashing here. As I said, I didn't want the full weapons lineup that were supplied in the kit. I wanted this to look like they were going on their final mission to drop their bombs. And so these are the GBUs. I don't know if they're 16, 18s, or 31, I'm not sure, but they looked as close as I could find to the bombs that were found in the movie. So sanding them, filling up the gaps. Obviously they don't fit together perfectly, and that's the plastic putty from Vallejo. I did cut off a little piece here of tubing. This is styrene tubing, because I wanted to make the nose part of the bombs look a bit more realistic. They are open, they're little veins that help with directions. And so the existing one was solid. I cut off those little sections there into a cross. So I cut out triangles that will leave the cross underneath that would then help hold the that circular tubing. So here I'm sanding it down, making it a little smoother. I did have to trim them because they were a little too wide. But once I'd done that, then this circular tubing fit in very well, and I glued that on with some just regular cement. Now here's me priming this bomb, and then once I'd masked it off, I then sprayed the olive drab onto the front and the rear, and gave it 2 or 3 coats. Once I removed the tape, you can see there was a little bit of bleed over, so I just ended up extending the olive drab a little bit more until I was happy with the finish. Here's some more touch-up by hand. I did the same thing on the back part. I really just want to make sure that I get a good coating. I made some custom decals. So this is what I found online. I have no idea how realistic this is or not, but I didn't want to have just plain bombs. So typically these bombs do have instructions on them, and so I printed some custom decals on decal paper, and then put these on using microset and microsol. I found that the decal paper is usually a little thicker than most decal sheets that you get with a model, but still you can get it to sit reasonably well. You can see here I left this decal sheet there, and my finger kept catching it, and you got to be careful when you're doing that because it'll end up in your finger and getting destroyed. So that's a little tip here, is always keep your decals away from your hands. Once that's all on and dried, I sealed them with clear coat. That also helped to show the close the gap of those extra decals. I'm gluing on the fuel tank now, and that's done with super glue. And don't forget to look at it underneath to make sure that it's straight. Same thing with these bombs here. I had to widen the holes with the blade to be able to get the pins inside the pylons to sit inside there. So this is just dry fitting here, and then putting it on with super glue. Same thing with the other side, putting the other side on with super glue, and then you end up with a very strong bond. Okay, so once that's all done and dry, it's time to clear coat the model. This just helps to seal in the decals again, helps to seal in the panel line wash, all the weathering, and makes it a bit more resistant to fingerprints and wear. So I did most of the underside first, as you can see here. I did a little bit on the top, but most of it was the underside so that it could sit on its wheels once it was dry. The stuff dries pretty quickly, and then I could work on the top. So there's all the other parts being clear coated, and you got to do it from different angles to make sure you get inside all the corners. Here's the top part, and clear coating the wings. You can see the kind of shine that comes up from the wet clear coat, but that'll dry and make it more of a matte or satin type finish. Insides there of the tail, and then the other side, and the airbrush really makes this so quick and so efficient, so highly recommend you get an airbrush. Now it's time to remove the masking over the cockpit, and shows that I did a reasonably good job of that. And here we're painting some parts for the inside of the canopy. I'm trying liquid mask in this project for the first time, just to see how it works, and I'm painting this all over the windshield here, and here you can see trying to get the edges correctly. I didn't quite get them as straight as I was hoping, but it did a reasonably good job of covering it. Now the main canopy had this center line down it. It was very frustrating. I actually made a separate video of this, how to get rid of it. So I scraped it down with a blade, not rough sandpaper. You scrape down with a blade and then sand it down with a 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000. And now it's time to polish. So I'm using the Tamiya polishing compounds with coarse, fine, and then polish with a final one. And here you can see it does get to be nice and smooth and clear. It's almost like it didn't exist. So this is a very nice way to get it to be nice and smooth. So again, with the liquid mask here, this is for the main canopy, and I think that probably only use it for very small areas in the future. This probably would have been easier just to mask off with a piece of masking tape, but we did give it a go. So once that was all done, you can see I used tape in the middle. I did some primer, probably could have used some black primer, but I used the gray primer and then black primer on top of that. Several coats of the black, because it does need to be black, like the rest of the top of the aircraft. Now we're removing the masking tape. Don't forget to mask underneath, otherwise paint will get underneath and ruin the glass from underneath. And I'm using my fingernail because it's not very sharp. You can use a Q-tip, you can use a piece of wood to remove it without scratching. I did some touch up here with a fine brush and some black primer. Don't forget to paint the inside, otherwise it'll be nice and shiny and won't look like it has any support there, which obviously it does. Now time to put the this is the guidance system, the head-up display. That's done with glue. Also put up a little light there, and then painted the side of the head-up display here with some black paint. So the windshield now goes on. I really actually like using this Testors clear coat or clear glue, the canopy glue. It works very well. It dries completely clear, and it's very easy to remove. I like it actually much more than the regular white glue. I'm going to be removing the masking, and I use this little toothpick here. It helps to scrape off very easily, and it doesn't damage the underlying plastic. Don't use anything metal, it will ruin it. And then did some touch up here with the brush. Same thing for the inside. I also painted the inside here with a black primer. It sticks very well to the clear glass, and you may need to do 2 coats, but it does a really good job of covering it. So that way you don't see the inside there. Now when that's all dry, then you're going to need to do the additional plastic or parts that go into the back of the canopy. I glued these in also with the clear canopy glue. If you put CA glue or cement, it is likely going to fog the glass. I do like these little details that they gave you for the inside of the canopy, and then using the canopy glue again for the mounting of the canopy. Here you can see I will use a piece of foam to hold it in place, and then there is a little strut that will help to support the canopy and make it really strong. I glued that in place, and here is the finished model. Enjoy.